Okay, so good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and start the program. My name is Romeo Arrieta, and I'm your Marin Realtors CEO, and I'd like to thank you for being here today for our general membership meeting. Our title today is Marin Headlines with Marin Independent Journal columnist Dick Spotswood. In a little while, you'll be hearing from our 2022 president, Logan Link, who will lead us through today's meeting. But I wanted to do a little housekeeping first, as is traditional in our online meeting world. Today, everybody except the speakers are muted by default. And the other thing that I'll mention is that you'll only be seeing the video of the speakers. But I will ask you to please put your questions using the Q&A feature, which should be available at the bottom of your screen. As always, I'd like to thank our sponsor. We can do these events without help from our sponsors. And it looks like we have Matt Prandy. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you and you can just unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. So yeah, just want to say it's a crazy rental market out there. Here at Prandy, as many of you know, we don't do any buying or selling of real estate, but just some cool statistics for you guys. We looked at the average rents from 2019 for single family homes, and we're seeing the rents back then about $4,400 a month for a single family home. Today's market is showing about $5,300 a month for a single family home. So that's about a $900 a month increase over the past 3 years here for single family home rents. There's the lowest inventory. I've been in this business now 15 years working with my mom, Melissa Prandy, and this is some of the lowest inventory and highest rents that we've ever seen. There's not a lot of data out there for comps on rentals, and I know there's a lot of 1031 exchanges happening with your clients. So keep in mind, if you have anyone that's considering a 1031 exchange in Marin and you're looking for information on what the rents might be able to yield, we'd be happy to provide you some comps because you're probably having a tough time finding those comps out there. I'm hoping to get together with all you soon and host some in-person meetings, but until then, thank you for trusting us with all your clients here at Prandy Property Management.
Thank you, Matt. Much appreciated. I always love the statistics. It is hard to find rental data, so it's helpful. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Logan Link, 2022 president. So before we get to what we've all been waiting for, which is hearing from Dick Spotswood, just a quick update on what we've been up to here at Marin Realtors. So I would say of the last 2 months, the biggest highlight has been Legislative Day in Sacramento, which was 2 weeks ago. Legislative Day is put on by the California Association of Realtors. And essentially it brings together realtors from all across the state. We all gather in Sacramento, and we had 14 members from Marin join us to essentially spend the day speaking with our politicians and advocating for home ownership. So it was really cool because at the beginning of the day, all of us, and there were a total of 2,400 realtors from across the state, gathered together and heard from Governor Newsom. And what I thought was cool is Governor Newsom was like full of energy, and he kind of said right off the bat, he was like, wow, this is amazing. I don't think I've spoken to a live audience of this size in like 2 years. So that was kind of a cool, it was like a cool experience, I think, for all of us to share together, like that energy of everyone being together. We could feel it from all of the different representatives who we spoke with. We also met with Mike McGuire in a smaller group setting and a few other kind of key players. And it was just really cool to be able to connect in person in that way and effective. The association was successful in defeating what was our kind of hot topic bill that we were hoping to get pushed out of the assembly. And this particular bill, had it gone through, would have really made it a lot more difficult to sell rental properties, including single family homes. So that was scraped from the assembly successfully after the day. And I think we all walked away feeling very informed, and it's just a good, great way to get our name out there as realtors and advocate for homeownership. So that was cool. And then also Blaine Morris, realtor member and our liaison to Jared Huffman, along with Romeo, spent last week in Washington, D.C. With the National Association of Realtors advocating for homeownership on the national level. So just know if you're interested in getting involved in that kind of thing, there are opportunities for all of our members to do that. But even if you're not able to attend this kind of thing, just know that we're out there working for homeownership. So that is kind of the main takeaway of what we've been working on here. And without further ado, I say let's just jump right into the program. Dick, good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Logan?
Good. How are you doing?
Excellent.
Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So everyone, you've likely heard of Dick Spotswood. He is a longtime Marin County resident and columnist for the Marin IJ. And I always think of Dick as just the guy who knows everyone and everything. So fun to chat with for insight. But Dick, is there anything, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been in Marin County? What's it like being a force in the local scene?
Well, I'm from far, far away originally, the Marina District of San Francisco.
Oh.
You can probably see it if you were a little higher on the hill in Mill Valley than I am. I've been in Marin County since 1976, which gets to be a veteran after a while. We sure visited a lot when we were kids. I'm one of the few people that can out there that can say they went to Marin County Country Club as a child in grammar school to play at the place. And if you've been out there lately, it hasn't changed. It's the same. I've been writing for I served for 12 years as a councilman and 3 terms as mayor of the city of Mill Valley, and 10 years as a director of the Golden Gate Bridge District and on many transportation commissions and forums. Then I started on Channel 22 KRCB as their election person, which was a 25-year experience, and we had a great run and won some awards. And then I got recruited to the Marin Scout newspapers when they were more individually oriented. I'll talk about that later, and have been with the Independent Journal for about 20 years, writing every Sunday and Wednesday about government politics, mostly in the North Bay.
Awesome.
So I'm married, by the way, 2 kids and 3 grandchildren, all thanks to realtors living in Marin County.
Perfect. I love it. Well, we're so glad to have you here today. So, Dick, we all keep up on what's happening in Ukraine and with inflation and with the Supreme Court on the national level, on the global level. But admittedly, a lot of us completely miss out on what's happening in our own communities. So why, in your opinion, is it important to stay involved in local issues?
It's the level of government that affects our lives most. If I'm trying to get out of Mill Valley tomorrow or today, I'm going to experience a 25-minute traffic jam. That's local government that's affecting my life instead of the 10 minutes it took me 2 months ago. When I turn on the water in my garden out here, I have to be very careful about when I turn it on, because local government's responsible, and I believe is responsible, for the part of the problem we have of lack of water in the county we're in. These are local issues. And so I read the stuff on the Ukraine every morning, just as much as everybody else, and I'm appalled just as much as everybody else and disgusted. But I'm still interested in what happens in my backyard. In my backyard right now, the 3 big issues I see are wildland fire. I'm looking out the window and I can see why. Water, same thing. And homelessness. It's a big issue, not just in the Bay Area, not just in coastal California, but up and down the West Coast. It's a gigantic issue, and Hawaii too, by the way. Those are quandaries. And people are less interested in local than historically they were. Some of that's the decline of local media. I mean, we used to have, every town had a newspaper, and you told you what the city council did that last Tuesday night whenever they met. That doesn't exist anymore. And it's not been replaced by online sources. And so that's one of the reasons. 2, we become more focused on national issues. My son and his wife own a home in San Rafael. They have 2 kids. They can tell you all about the Ukraine, but I'm not sure they can tell you much about the San Rafael City Council. And so that's a factor of life today. And some people call it the death of local. That people are just focusing broader. The internet focuses that way, forces us to focus that way. And how we get our news focuses that way. And our conversation is that way. And so some issues, on the other hand, water, one. I find it just about everybody has an opinion on water. And they may not follow local issues or know why. I had a very prominent guy call me and said, I'm very upset about the water issue. What do I do? No, there's an answer to that, but that's a common question.
All right.
State issues, by the way, I have to mention the state. I won't be talking much about the state, but this election, we're focused on local issues. The state issues aren't prominent. Perhaps it's because California is effectively a one-party state. The recall, the governor's recall, where Governor Newsom got 62% to keep him in office, mimicked the exact amount of votes, 62% that he won in 2018. And a lot of people figure, I guess 62 is the magic number for Gavin Newsom. And so why follow the race? Yeah, so nobody does.
All right. Well, then in that case, let's keep local alive. We'll go through the main three issues that you've identified. So water, wildfire, and homelessness. Let's start there. And then everyone at the end, once we run through these three hot topics, put your questions into the Q&A. You can even put them in, as we go along, but we'll get to your questions at the end and just do a quick question, quick answer session to cover anything related to Marin County. All right. Sound good?
Let's go.
Okay, so topic one, water. So California, of course, is in a state of drought. Are we still in a state of drought in Marin County? And if so, what effect is it having, and what solutions, if any, are on the table or discussions are being
We have a
had?
Mediterranean climate historically. We've had dry years and wet years historically. That's never going to change. It's the nature of the geography where we are. We're blessed, on the other hand, with prevailing winds coming in and bringing rain sometimes. So we've survived quite nicely over the years, but it's gotten tougher and tougher. The county grows, and we don't have any additional water supplies. At least I'm going to speak there about the Marin Municipal Water District boundaries, which is pretty much everything except Far West Marin and Novato. Kudos to the North Marin Water District. They've been ahead of the curve, and I think are doing a very fine job about looking for additional water sources. MMWD, despite a good staff, the board, I think, what's the proper neutral term, has been lacking when it comes to finding additional sources of water. We have the impression that their most prominent means of water provision is conservation, which means cutting back. Conservation is part of it. We do wastewater. I mean, we've all turned the sprinkler on too many times. Lawns don't work in this kind of climate. But to have a lifestyle which most Marin County people find preferable, we need additional sources of water. The board has not pursued them. We're having an election next November for 3 of the 5 MMWD board members. In my mind, it's the premier election next November in Marin County. I think we're focused on it now. We're really going to be focused on it starting this summer and until November. And the principal question is, directors, are you going to pursue additional sources of water? If so, which one? 3, why should we believe you since you haven't done it in the past? I know for a fact there will be a full range of qualified candidates opposing the incumbents, which is great. That's how a debate and how conversations and how the community gets involved. But that's the question in my mind. Will you pursue additional sources of water? What are they, and how can we believe you?
All right, so it'll be an election issue, and that's probably where
It will be dominant.
All right, okay, and those elections are in November.
November, in 3 seats.
Cool, awesome. So we'll be talking a lot more about water, I'm sure. Okay, fire. So again, something that we know all too well has been impacting California is wildfires. So in Marin, how does this translate? Are our leaders actually concerned about wildfire breaking out within the county? Or are we mostly seeing just impacts from how the fires affect in general our lifestyle? Like, what is happening in Marin with wildfires? What's the conversation? What's the level of concern? And are our leaders doing anything to mitigate the risk? What's happening there?
I can tell you just about everybody I've talked to is terrified. Leadership now is terrified at the prospect of wildland fire, and will do whatever they can so it doesn't happen on their watch. Period. And that's a great thing. There's nothing that like terror that can motivate any of us, including elected officials. They're well aware if there's a fire, big fire that does much damage in Marin County, nobody is going to say you did too much. They're going to say you didn't do enough. And by the way, when it comes to wildland fire, don't forget the aspect of evacuation. Safe evacuation, planning for that is crucial. I mean, it's one thing. Bill Walsh was the fire chief from Real Valley back in 1989 when they had the Berkeley Oakland fire. He and I and a couple other people on the city council went up and looked at had the tour courtesy of the fire department up there of where it started, how it spread, I mean, on the ground. And I remember we saw a pool of silver by a house. And the fire chief pointed out to me that pool of silver was an engine block in a car that melted. That's an intense fire. And Walsh said to me when we came back, I used to think we could get everybody out. Now I'm not so sure. And so in the last 25, 30 years, the work, or the last 10 years mostly, has been to not only get everybody out, but crucially, to stop a small fire on a windy day from becoming a big fire. Stopping the small fire initially is the key. Once you've got a lot of wind, evacuation is the next thing. And by the way, some evacuation things that are happening are quite innovative. There's something called LRAD out now. And if I sit here and hear the siren, which is I used to do, I can now also hear a voice on the loudspeaker telling me, don't go down Blythedale, go down Summit. The LRAD can communicate vocally to areas where it's installed. And it's being installed in some Marin communities. It's a terrific technological development to get people out in a safe manner without panic. You feel that somebody is in charge, which eliminates panic. Fire, I think they're doing a great job. The trouble is, folks, if you go out and walk your hillsides, it's daunting. The amount of dead brush and trees around is despite the fact they're doing a heck of a job clearing, it's just such a daunting task. When I went over to see the results of the fire in the East Bay, I was shocked to find that flatland areas were wiped out. The fire had come down and it wasn't the trees burning. The fire was so intense, it was houses burning, spreading. It wasn't a forested area. It was like flatlands here. It's a huge risk. If you don't believe it, go up to a coffee park and go up to Round Barn up in the hills of Santa Rosa. They're still rebuilding. Who would have believed the fire would have got down to Coffee Park, crossed the highway, crossed the smart tracks, and wiped out a flat neighborhood. It's all about topography, about the weather, and luck. And we live in a forest, or some of us do. And if you live in a forest, you're subject to forest fire. By the way, you folks that don't live in a forest, you're subject to earthquakes and sea level rise. So don't feel too cocky. It's the nature of human existence. We're not odd in Marin County. We're just simply, we've always thought we were kind of special and it didn't apply to us. Now we're just like every other place in the United States. There's some natural phenomena out there that we got to be wary of. So strengthen your home for an earthquake, clear around your house for wildland fire, and put on boots if you're worried about sea level rise.
There we go. And listen to the loudspeaker when the evacuation is happening.
If you have it.
Yes.
If you have it. And you know, it's low tech, it's solar powered. And so the idea is it's not going to go out.
Mhm.
Low tech in an emergency, real good.
Yeah, I like it. All right. And then final hot topic, homelessness. Again, California crisis, homelessness has been a problem for a while. It seems like there's been a major uptick in the last couple of years. So what we would be curious to know is, are we seeing an uptick in homelessness in Marin County? And if so, what does it look like here? Where is this happening? Is it concentrated in certain areas? And are any steps being taken to find a solution? It's a tricky problem, but what are you seeing on a local level?
I don't think anybody has the solution.
Yeah.
There's things that we should be doing that we're not doing. I recently interviewed Michael Schellenberger, who's an independent candidate for governor that wrote the book San Francisco, which is fundamentally about the failure to address the homeless crisis in the city, despite spending huge amounts of money. He, like some other surprisingly progressive people that I've recently spoken to, advocate reopening 21st century humane style California state mental hospitals. The great mistake was closing those places and not updating them for the 20th century, but closing them and releasing the folks that were living there incapable because of psychological, mostly, occasionally severe substance abuse, and often what they call a double diagnosis, psychological and substance abuse, incapable of living on the streets safely. Just from a moral point of view, it's wrong to see people die on the streets. That's what's happening under freeways. I went up to Santa Rosa and looked at something quite interesting called tiny homes. And the effort, something we're not doing in Marin County, is we're not providing transitional housing. The idea of tiny homes and the philosophy of transitional housing is to get people out of Sausalito on the park, under the freeway in San Rafael, out of the park in Novato immediately, and offer them clean, supervised, inexpensive, relatively, housing now. We'll move them then later, hopefully. Sometimes the mental hospitals, I think, should be reopened partially, and transitional housing, but permanent supportive housing. These are sick folks that cannot work, should be treated, and it's just wrong to see them out there. And I don't think we're doing enough right now in the county of Marin to do it, despite the absolute best of intentions. I wish I was more optimistic on it.
Yeah.
I try to avoid going to San Francisco these days because as a native San Franciscan, it's just so distressing to see parts of San Francisco in the state that's in. And I can tell you that old friends that lived there their whole life are not happy campers.
Yeah. Interesting. So to kind of backtrack a little bit, just for those of us who are not as informed as we'd like to be on the topic. So it sounds like there are encampments happening in Marin right now that have grown in the last, like when did this kind of become a problem? Like a year ago, maybe?
Oh, no. It's been building for a good 10 years, I'd say.
10 years.
You know, some of the encampments you don't see. I was with a fellow who was advocating bike paths, additional bike paths.
Okay.
And he says, I want to show you a route over Kell Park Hill in San Rafael, between two parts of San Rafael, and we think we could do something. So we're traipsing through the woods by the railroad tunnel, above the railroad tunnel on the freeway.
Mm.
And in the middle of everything, we come into a fairly decent sized homeless camp. You know, and now folks in the homeless camp want to have warm food. How do you have warm food in a homeless camp? You build a campfire. You're living in the middle of the thicket. What's the possibility? Fire. All of a sudden, two issues have now run into each other. You could have, well, there was a big fire behind City Hall years ago. And not a giant one, but a spectacular one, because I was driving down the street and saw it. I said, oh my God. And went up there to talk to see what was happening. So homeless camps in the hills aren't benign. They're a risk to those people there. They deserve consideration, but they're also a risk to the neighbors.
Yeah.
The people living about. It's a problem we have not got our fingers around yet anywhere. We're doing better than a lot of places.
Yeah.
I went down to Santa Barbara and spoke to the mayor of Santa Barbara, beautiful place, you know, Santa Barbara. She told me we got a big homeless problem.
Interesting. So we have the hillsides in Marin, definitely seeing a lot of encampments there. And then there's a large one in Sausalito and in Novato. Is that right?
And other freeways in San Rafael.
Exactly. So in these different pockets, and I've noticed that it seems like local members of the community are starting to see it a little bit more and at least discuss it a little bit more, which is maybe something. Have there been any housing projects for homelessness, anything that's happening?
Yeah. First of all, the state's been, the state, they're trying. You know, I don't want to be critical about not trying, but we have to be result oriented, not effort oriented. Yeah. And you know, we've got Project Home Key, which is working in Corte Madera at that old Best Value Inn, which we all drive by constantly. There's not been any problems there. It was initially opposed by the neighbors, and then the folks in Corte Madera had the sense to take time and spend with the neighbors and find out what their objections were, and were patient, and that objections went away. The one over in Sausalito Drive remains controversial. My problem with it is it's so darn expensive. $300,000 or $400,000 a unit. A tiny home up in Sonoma is $20,000, including the pad. You know, we're talking really a radical difference. And if the goal is to get as many people out of squalor into some organized operation, then we have to look at ways that work quickly, effectively, and are result oriented. I can tell you the one I saw at Sonoma, Las Galicas Village, it's called, and run by St. Vincent de Paul of Sonoma County, with under the county auspices. It's county funded. The neighbors who originally were concerned that it's dropped away, it's gone. They're not opposed to it any longer. They're not concerned because it's well managed.
Yeah,
it's got to be well managed. Just providing housing, not going to do it.
yeah. So in Marin County, like with things like Project Home Key, which for those who don't know, Project Home Key, Dick, correct me if I'm wrong, but is essentially a coordinated effort to take like multi-unit buildings or underutilized motels, things like that, and create housing solutions with resources for our currently homeless population. Is that right? Okay. So with things like Project Home Key or something like a tiny home initiative, where do who has the power to decide where these things could go? Like what locations, or how does that come about? Someone spearheading the effort?
The real power is in the neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
People say you can't fight City Hall, and
Yeah.
actually you can. Theoretically, the power in incorporated areas is the city, and in unincorporated areas it's the Board of Supervisors. Truth of the matter is the supervisors generally have the route to the money. So a team, I suggested a location in Mill Valley, and I talked to our supervisor, Stephanie Moulton Peters, about it, a motel, which I had, seemed to me, a couple of them, you're all owned by the freeway. And she says, we've gone to them and nobody's interested in selling right now. Part of the reasons is that people are traveling again and the motel's property became more valuable. But there are owners that want to sell, want to get out, and that's what we have to look for. But we have to do it in cooperation, coordination with the neighbors to demonstrate that there's no risk to them. If they perceive there's a risk, it's just as bad as if there is a risk. Perception is important. And we need to, there was a whole concern over at South Alicio that there would be pedophiles there, child molesters, because the law doesn't restrict who goes there. Well, I would have done everything I can. We're not talking about 2 or 3 people. I mean, we're not talking about the bulk of the folks. Heck, say no pedophile convictions. I mean, that's what I'd say. I want to address the neighborhood's concern. We're not talking about many people. That's not what most people are, why they're there. They're psychologically troubled, but they're not pedophiles. But if that's your concern, because it's near schools, we get it. And that's how I would handle it if I was a supervisor. God forbid I was a supervisor, but a hard job.
Yeah.
Hard job. City council is much more fun.
Well, I believe the South Alicio project is going before the Board of Supervisors, I think tomorrow. So
it's not going away.
And it's a continued discussion. All right. Well, if we feel we've covered those 3 topics, I say it's time to dive into the chat, or the Q&A.
Sure.
So any questions anyone has on these topics or others, put them into the Q&A and let's pull it up and see what we have happening here. All right. Well, let's see. How can we? Okay, so Katie Beacock asked a question on the topic of homelessness as well. She was wondering how, as we can, as individuals, help move in collaboration with the county to take care of homelessness, which I think is essentially what you just covered there. But by just being involved in the conversation, is that what you're saying is the main way?
Also, there's some excellent nonprofit providers. I have worked with St. Vincent de Paul of Marin. Full disclosure, my wife is a active St. Vincent de Paul committee member here in Mill Valley at Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And I work with another Catholic group that supports them. We generally deal mostly with housed people, but many are precariously housed and formerly homeless. Precariously housed means you can bounce back. You could become homeless again. And so the goal of those nonprofits and similar nonprofits are excellent, homeward bound, is to keep people housed. And we can do it in lots of ways, and the county has ways to assist. We have an understanding now that if the tenant causes problems in a property, The county will be involved in making that right, which is good because, you know, I own a rental property. I don't necessarily want anything bad happen to my rental property, but I want to do the right thing. And I also want to get paid. Section 8 vouchers, we have a community in Marin County that accepts Section 8 vouchers. And actually, I'm told by St. Vincent de Paul that some of the folks have a business model that works quite well with it. But it has to be, once again, make sure that your property is returned to you as it was delivered.
All right. Well, let's hop to a totally different topic then to keep things fresh. So this is a question from Anna Frost. I think it's a good one. Why is the MMWD, that would be the Marin Municipal Water District, not at the table in the discussion of increased housing? If meeting the quota requires more water, not just more conservation, can the state be lobbied for funds and solutions like desalination? And if so, shouldn't the MMWD be part of the conversation? It's a good question, Anna.
Well, they should. The trouble is MMWD is a provider. And supposedly this is the bureaucracy. But I won't not even say the bureaucracy, the way our government theoretically is structured.
Yeah.
So it should be the communities that decide what the carrying capacity of the town is. Unfortunately, the state of California has usurped that authority to a great extent and said, here's what your carrying capacity will be. And the folks at the MMWD are left to pick up the pieces. There's not much discretion left, thanks to state law. We're going to get bigger. And they're going to have to provide more water. And I listened to a discussion at the water board recently. They know that. They know that. They have no idea how they're going to provide the water. But they understand more housing, more water. The trite answer is, well, they will have to conserve more. Yeah. We are conserving right now. I am, you are, I suspect. There's a limit to conservation. We're at that limit. Now we need new sources. And the water board's the provider. It really doesn't determine how much is going to be out there. They can tell you the problem, but the policymakers at the city council, board of supervisors, and unfortunately the state legislative level.
Okay. Here's a question from Waika Barticelli. Why is insurance so hard to get for condo complexes this year when there was no problem last year?
God knows. I don't know. But the key answer when you're listening to a person, you want to have any credibility, is to say, I don't know and I don't know. I'm not an insurance expert. I won't even go to the insurance commissioner's race.
Mm-hmm.
We can.
There we go. It's true. All right. And let's see. What are your thoughts? This is from Katie Beacock. What are your thoughts on the current housing element process all over Marin?
Yes. It's a bad time to be a city council member because you have been given numbers by the state of California called RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation, which a recent column of mine, which was undisputed by the parties, showed that the state auditor explained that the numbers upon which that based were not based on solid data or statistics. It was a sign of a state wish list to build more housing. That's very discouraging when you read that the numbers you're supposed to follow aren't perhaps as strong as you thought they were, or you were told they were. Cities have really limited authority because their city attorney is sitting there telling them their sworn duty is to follow state law. And in this case, state law says you got to build the housing according to the RHNA numbers. Affordable, workforce, moderate, and market rate. Market rate's about 40%, 50%. We do a pretty good job of building market rate housing around here. It's just $1.7 million is the median price recently, and it's expensive. We do a pretty poor job of providing workforce housing and affordable housing. The economics are tough. We're going to have to do better, and the state's going to have to be a partner with us. If they want us to build workforce housing, they got to be a partner, just not in telling us the numbers, but where it counts, money. So far, I've been weak in that area. They love telling you what to do. They don't like paying for it.
All right. Okay, from Katie Beacock, how do you feel the county is dealing with the issue of sea level rise around the county?
They have a terrific report out telling you where the problem is. It's kind of an interactive function. And I have a piece of property that's subject to, not my home, subject to sea level rise in Marin County. So I'm sensitive to that. Spotting the problem is the first thing. They've been terrific at spotting the problem. The second dilemma is, what do you do about it? I guess one of the most classic examples is what's happening on the US 101 Sausalito Tam Valley interchange by Marin City. I mean, that's been, high level, high tide, low tide problem well before we started worrying about sea level rise. It's just gotten worse, and it's going to get worse. So what do you do in a place like that? Well, you become adapted. You adapt to it. You raise the highway. You make sure there's a barrier, a berm. It's not going to let the water into Marin City. Yeah, we don't have the plan for that yet, but that's pretty an obvious solution that most folks in the public sector would agree to. How are you going to pay for that? One of the problems, transportation is more for my forte, and people used to ask me, why not do a monorail? Well, they always never wanted to get to the hard part. That's the easy part. Hard part, how do you pay for it? I don't care if it's a monorail or more freeways or a bridge or raising the road. Figuring out how to pay for it is the hard part of the process. And we have no idea right now because nobody wants more taxes and nobody wants water in their backyard.
All right. It all comes back to that,
Money.
It does. Okay. Let's see. What do we have here? This is great. So many questions coming in. All right. Well, let's see. Let's go back to the housing element. So we'll hop back to that first. Are we keeping you on your toes here, Dick?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, good. So this one is from Michelle Klein. And Michelle says, regarding the housing element demand for increasing housing units in Marin, 14,210, correct? Many feel that in unincorporated Marin, the fire, water, and emergency evacuation challenges, do you think we'll ever produce these units? If we do not, the state threatens to take away our local control. I recall you recommended San Quentin Peninsula for some unincorporated Marin. The county claims that property cannot take this much. What do you see for our future?
Well, there are locations to build housing, period. I'm working, one of my favorite affordable housing sites is called Mount Bordel Village in Novato.
Okay.
And I was privileged to be at the groundbreaking and at the ribbon cutting, heavily funded by the Marin Community Foundation and done by Habitat Humanity. Go up there and look at it. It's not far from downtown. It's just, you won't notice it's affordable housing. A good idea. That works, huh? There are lots of locations, and I'm working on one for each Marin community. I have one for Mill Valley too. They're all controversial. I have one for Ross. Wait till that comes out. Let me give you an example. Downtown Larkspur, there's a huge square block that's empty with a big sign on it saying, home of Larkspur's library. How long has that sign been up? It's not going to be, they don't have the money for that. And they say they're going to have it. Fine. Let me know. Wake me up when they do. What we should do is look at that site for multi-unit housing, reserving a little section, maybe a good size section for a library someday. It's a gigantic parcel. There are others around Marin County. When I mentioned earlier, Marin Town Country Club that I saw as a kid, it's a Jurassic Park for we're the dinosaurs. Jurassic Park, in that it's a huge, substantial facility in a town which has great compassion, and it's completely underutilized. It has a small section of affordable housing, the old summer cottages, and the rest is empty. There's a site. We can build housing in a way that's compatible with the community if we work with the community and the community is understandable that something's going to happen. If everybody believes we can clench our fists and say never, 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 the state's just going to roll over us like a steamroller and do whatever they want. So the best solution is working with the state to get some things done. My own preference is to build the affordable and workforce housing first. If we don't get the market rate, that's a pretty good argument in court. We've done the hard stuff. We've done the affordable. And so at some point in time, as my lovely wife always says, all you can do is all you can do.
Yeah. So Dick, my understanding with the housing element is that what the state has told the county that we must do, and cities, is identify these sites that would be good for housing and then create rules and regulations that essentially allow for housing to be built on these sites. And then it's developers who would do the actual building. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it kind of becomes like a multi-step process of what the cities and counties need to do is identify these sites, which we've all probably heard about, the different workshops and things available for like the community to get involved with choosing these sites, right? And then the next step will be to see, do the developers come and do they bring that to fruition, essentially?
In San Francisco, some of the folks have been complaining that the city has approved many housing sites that has never been developed.
Right.
And for economic reasons. The state legislature, bipartisanly, in both parties, are short of people with fiscal common sense and experience. If you've ever run your own business, I was a lawyer for 45 years. I ran my own shop, even with other people. I was the guy with the checkbook. You understand that you're restricted on what you can do, not by your imagination, but by that checkbook quite often. And so the state of California doesn't seem to get that. It's like people write me all the time and say, we can't build more houses, Marin, we don't have the water. Let me tell you, the state legislature does not care, period. We're subject to fire. They don't care. They just want to build those houses. There's a story in the New York Times this morning about, or maybe last yesterday, on how a housing affordability crisis in the Western world is gigantic. It identified only one city in America that had the proper housing income ratio. One place, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That was it. Everybody else is out of compliance, if you will. These are things we're not going to solve in Marin County. These are giant problems that nationwide, and actually far larger than nationwide. I mean, Hong Kong, London, Paris, they all have the same problems. Milan. So these are not, and the legislature doesn't understand that, or doesn't want to understand that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Complicated topics. As related to housing, category of ADUs, so additional dwelling units. So we have a question from Joe Prius. Municipalities are resisting permitting ADUs and SB 9. Development under these rules eliminate the land cost in new building, which means housing built in this way could be relatively affordable. How do you suggest those of us interested in affordable housing influence city officials? If we speak up, or if I speak up as a developer, I will get punished, was Joe's question. And I think it might be helpful, Dick, to give a quick description of what SB 9 is.
SB 9 says that you have basically a by right ability to build a second unit on your house, and you also have a by right ability, with some minor restrictions, to subdivide your lot into two, and then you could build a second ADU, a second unit, grandma unit, call it what you like, on the lot. You could go from 1 to 4 units on the same lot. I had a pleasure some years ago of going to one of my favorite museums, the City Museum of New York, up next to Central Park, and they had an ADU excellence exhibit. And really some architecturally inspiring ADUs that really you'd say, I want that next door. Mm-hmm. And so my idea for your questionnaire is that in Marin County, at next year's county fair, we have an ADU exhibit that we show folks what a good quality ADU looks like and how it's compatible with their neighborhood and how it doesn't disrupt it. I have an ADU next to me. The only problem was the tenant recently moved. The problem was that he was one of the most popular people on the street. And so the problem was we lost him. Not for any real estate reasons. He just moved to Washington State. But I'm just kind of humorously saying it had caused no problem whatsoever in the neighborhood. None. And so I'm an ADU advocate. And city officials, the public, ADUs can be a wonderful addition to the community, not heavily disruptive. Change is change, but it can be compatible with your neighborhood. It provides generally affordable housing for people that need it, workforce housing. people who work at the market, great place. Integrated with the neighborhood. It brings, frankly, rich people and middle to lower income people together in the same community. That's a benefit itself. You know, what's a small town? Small town isn't an enclave of just rich people or poor people. It's an amalgam of everybody across. That's our image of an American small town. So my great idea is, let's work with the Marin County County Fair, and let's have an ADU as the principal exhibit excellence in ADUs in Marin County, and show people in hard, you know, example. You could bring ADUs in. You know, it's like you can bring a tiny home in. I'm not suggesting tiny homes and ADUs are the same deal, but you can do that. And why not do it in one place and celebrate it and use that as a means to explore excellence in housing and in ADUs. The architects, I think every architect out there is saying, yeah, I got an idea.
Yeah, that's really fun. I love that. We have a couple of comments in the chat kind of celebrating that idea as well. So what I'm getting from that, I'm with you, is that maybe the way that we really shift the narrative is by focusing on getting the community on board, and then let things naturally evolve from there. Is that SB 9 passed in like 2020, and like new ADU laws were enacted to make it more streamlined, right? So maybe it's getting the community on board. That's the missing piece.
The other piece, which part of I'm talking about with the ADUs and a festival, or festival's the wrong word, but exhibit, is excellence in architecture.
Yeah.
The best way to convince the community to accept additional housing is to show them excellence. If you show them a cookie cutter version that El Camino Real and Millbrae is loaded with, they're going to get turned off. There is excellence in architecture. Some years ago, I talked with the architecture critic of the San Francisco Chronicle, who was a big proponent of additional housing. And I referenced a piece of property in Marin County, and he said, oh yeah, well, that was like a turnoff. And he's a big proponent. Excellence in architecture, to use the architecture phrase, excellence doesn't cost that much more. And when you show people a good product, they're far more willing to accept the second version of that. And when you show them a bad product, they say, yeah, I don't want that. And so excellence in architecture has to be a piece of the housing puzzle.
Oh my goodness, I could not agree more with that. I think that is so incredibly true. All right, what do we have? From Carol Case. What do you think about the election in California in November? Will California ever be a more balanced political environment instead of a one-party state?
Well, unfortunately, the American problem, there's an American problem here, is the polarization of the nation into two tribes. With a few of us trying to be I'm a registered declined to state, what we call no party preference right now. But I did that when I first got involved in the media to convince people I was no longer ever going to run for office. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. California needs two competitive parties. Marin County used to have two competitive parties. When I first started out, Bill Falanti was the assemblyman. Falanti used to always call me up and say, Dick, I'm the kind of Republican you can vote for. There would be a practical reach across the aisle. There were incentives for parties to try to reach people on the other side. And frankly, we're only talking about moderates. The base of each party always was very firm, but the swingable middle was larger. It's tiny right now. It is tiny. And the state is divided. You know, coastal California, where the money and the population is Democratic, and the rural mountain, unpopulated, you know, Sierra County comes to mind, are Republicans with very radical different views on the future of the state. And so there are middle grounds, but there's no incentive politically to propagate those values because each party are divided into two intransient bases. And breaking that open is the American quandary. And I am not an optimist when it comes to the future of politics in America. Every year in the last 10 years, it's gotten worse. And I'm troubled by this and terrified it more for my children and grandchildren. Hopefully I won't see it. But we're seeing very discouraging signs of dividing up in these two tribes. And it's geographical, it's economic, and it's class-based. The Democrats used to be the party of the working person. Well, most of those guys are Republicans now. Suburban people, around here, they used to be solid Republicans, moderate Republicans, Bill Bagley Republicans, Al Gore Republicans, Gary Giacomini, who was a Republican. And my thesis is we need those kind of people, if the Republicans want to come back, to have the Gary Giacomini, the Bill Bagley, and the Al Boro, and the Bill Falanti Republicans run for office in Marin County. But they're going to have views that are going to reflect, frankly, middle to upper middle class values, and well-educated people values. You can't go around saying, well, there's no such thing as climate change. Well-educated people are not going to accept that because their companies don't accept that. So
It's almost a similar thing to what you were saying about showing that things like ADU and affordable housing can be doable with good design. It's almost like maybe we have these preconceived notions of what something is when we hear a certain word. We hear affordable housing and there's a thought of this is what this is. Or we hear Republican and we have a thought, or Democrat and have a thought. Maybe it's about showing, hey, maybe we need to actually look a little bit deeper than whatever the words conjure up in our mind.
I'd love to see a rise of independent candidates.
Mhm.
I mentioned Michael Schellenberg before, running against for governor as an independent. Very interesting fellow. Doesn't fit the liberal conservative divide to the slightest. Just is independent, out of the box thinking. Wow, independent, out of the box thinking. That's my candidate.
I like it. All right. Question from Anna Frost. As a resident of Ross Valley, development at Marin Town and County Development is also increasing gridlock. As a transportation specialist, what are your blue skies for relieving traffic congestion in Marin?
Relieving traffic congestion. First of all, I'm like everybody else. I travel all over this county all the time, making traffic worse, of course. And it drives me nuts. Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, I kind of like the name. Sir Francis Drake Boulevard drives me just tough. Solutions? I don't have any. I used to think there were solutions. The best we can do right now is alternatives. I'm not opposed to practical. I favor, not opposed to negative. I favor practical improvements. And we've got all sorts of places where traffic signals are not timed. It's very difficult to widen streets because people live on those streets. I'm not a believer in restoring the train to Fairfax, as somebody advocated a few years ago. I just don't think that's a very practical answer. We have a transit system that's really designed to do one thing well, and that's to take people, Golden Gate Transit, people from suburban Marin and Sonoma to downtown San Francisco. But it doesn't do the rest of it of moving people very well, unless you're what they call transit dependent, folks without a car, because they can't afford a car. I don't have an answer. The conundrum, I think this is a conundrum. We know we need more workforce housing. We know we need more affordable housing. We know that housing will consume more water and will cause more traffic.
There we go.
That's what's called a conundrum.
That is the definition of a conundrum. I like it. All right. So just to keep us on track of time here, I think we'll do 2 more questions and then we'll let Dick out of the hot seat. Let's see. What do we have here? We've covered a lot of these. Okay. From an anonymous attendee, any updates with the Ritter Center in San Rafael? Talk of moving it to Terra Linda, but that died off ways back. Still brings a blight and scares merchants and people shopping in downtown San Rafael. Do you have any insight?
I'm very sympathetic to the merchants in downtown San Rafael. I would say I have volunteered at the St. Vincent de Paul dining room, which is similar in mission. Is that the right word? In mission to Ritter House, a concern for people. And at one time, Christine Priquette's executive director of St. Vincent de Paul Marin, an excellent top flight person. And they actually had to have a security guard come to make sure their crowd was in order. It's the nonprofit's job to do 2 things well. 1, to take care of their clients. Their clients are desperately in need. And B, or 2, that they do so in a manner that is consistent with the safety and order that those in the community, merchants, need to succeed. The last thing we need in San Rafael is a failed business community. That's just part of the spiral downward of a town. A successful business community is a spiral up in a town. More we can do to make the business community, especially the small business community, operating in a very difficult environment, because let's face it, online shopping has been very tough on a lot of small merchants. The belief that every shop on the street was going to be rented to somebody at a fair market rent is tough right now. I go down every street in Marin and I have my eye open for vacancies, only because I'm just curious about what that does to the community. Empty banks. Mill Valley has 2 empty banks right now. What's going to go in those? It could have 3. Oh, actually, excuse me, it has 3. Yeah, and so that's a quandary, because the nature of the business has changed. So we have to work with them, and the nonprofits have to work with them to make sure their clients are compatible. If they're not, it's the nonprofit's responsibility to do their best in conjunction with the police. I don't want to dismiss the role of the police in this, but really it's done best by the nonprofits. We've done a pretty good job. Actually, I think the situation downtown, personally, in downtown San Rafael has improved. A few years ago, I thought it was far worse, frankly. You may have a different impression, spend more time there, but that's just my own impression. So we can pick it up. I think they're doing a pretty good job. And I'm not a complainer about Ritter House or St. Vincent de Paul or any of those folks. I think they're doing the best they can do. And the more we can do to help them, the better.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Dick. So there's more questions in the chat, and I feel like we could go for hours and hours, which would be so much fun. But out of respect for your time and for everybody's time, I would say let's maybe we'll just see if we can rope you back in and bring you back and keep going through all of this.
Well, Logan, I'd love to come back. The one thing I have to tell your viewers on this election, keep your eye on the fact that some of these races are top 2 elections. The assembly race, the supervisors races, we're coming back in November for another round. So there's plenty to talk about.
Yeah, it's true. Exactly. Local issues and local conversations are not going anywhere anytime soon. So
thank you, Logan. Thank you, Romeo. Thank you, Realtors.
Yes, thank you so much, Dick. And one last question before you bounce off. If we are now all engaged and interested and want to keep up on local issues, where would you suggest we go to keep up with your columns or just with topics in general? Is there a resource?
Wednesdays and Sundays, I'm online as well as in print, and please take a look at that. The other thing I urge the Realtors to do is to follow your government affairs committee is probably doing this already, but you need to follow your local city councils. The local newspapers don't exist anymore that do that. And so you're the last line of defense to get for your members to get them informed. And how you do that, the trick is to make it interesting when you read it. And there's lots of interesting things happening in Fairfax and Ross and Novato and Sausalito, all these places that the Realtors can play a real role, at least among their members and among maybe their clients as well. So I would urge the Realtors to, you're the last line. Community groups are the last line to keep us informed. And the Realtors play an important part of that, along with a few other groups.
I like that. So we will catch you in the Marin IJ on Wednesdays and Sundays, you said?
Indeed.
Right, okay. And then I say, let's all make a concerted effort. If all of us went to one city council meeting and then like the rest of the year, it would be so impactful. And we can share information with each other, read Dick's column, and we'll be pretty good. So
thanks, Logan. Take care.
All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We'll hopefully see you next time. Okay, everybody. Well, I think that essentially concludes our program for today. Craig just added into the chat a great link about the ADU speaker series that we hosted last year. There were a lot of questions in the Q&A on this topic. So if you're curious about that, check out the link and learn a little bit more. And I think that pretty much covers us. Romeo, is there anything else that we were wanting to share with our members before we let them go on their day?
Couple of things. Just want to mention that we will be sending out soon applications to serve in a leadership position for 2023. So keep your eye out for that. We will send a recap of this program and all of our previous programs in the rundown. And then also want to make sure to mention that whenever we do these, we have speakers that the views expressed by our speakers may not be 100% the views of the association, but we think it's important to hear a variety of views out there. So we hope this was educational. We hope it was thought-provoking. And I'd like to thank our moderator, President Logan Link, and turn it over to Logan to close us out.
Thank you, Romeo. Well said. And one last piece of information I'll share before we go. Women's Council of Realtors, our friends over at WCR, are hosting a panel next Tuesday, the 17th, from 9 to 11. And that surrounds schools. So on the topic of schools, they will have different school supervisors, superintendents speaking all together, I believe 4 of them. So that should be really fun and informative as well. And if you're curious about that, just shoot over an email to myself or to Romeo, and we'll connect you with the information. Okay, everybody, thank you again. And we will see you next time.